Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 2 of Animalcolm by David Baddiel, continuing from chapter 9, Kind of Green. When Malcolm woke up on the grass near the goat pen, he felt a little odd. For a start, he felt very tired, or at least he felt like all his limbs were much heavier than normal, and that moving his head or his arms or his legs was a real effort. His body in particular felt weighed down, like there was something hefty on his back, pressing him into the grass. But he had occasionally felt a bit like this waking up at home, when he'd gone to bed late. Plus his dad had once described to him feeling exactly like this when he woke up. So maybe, Malcolm thought, I've just slept badly, which would make sense, seeing as how I hadn't been planning on going to sleep at all. Last thing I remember was that stupid old goat staring at me, and then, well, I must have passed out. No wonder I feel weird. He tried to see where the goat had gone, but he couldn't, for some reason, see much at all. Every time he lifted his head, all he could see were the tips of the grass and just the bottom edge of the goat pen. He strained his neck as high as it could go. It felt, strangely, like he could in fact stretch his neck further up from his shoulders than usual, but he still couldn't see more than a foot or so above the ground. Well, of course, Malcolm thought, it's because I'm lying down. I can feel my tummy and hands and legs on the grass. On, it must be said, the wet and muddy grass. So let's stand up. This turned out to be much more difficult than usual. Try as he might, Malcolm couldn't seem to get off all fours. He pushed and pushed with his arms, trying to get himself up, but nothing doing. It was exhausting. One more push, he thought. One big heave. He summoned up all his strength and genuinely started to get up. He even, for a second, saw a tiny bit of goat horn peeping over the pen fence, before tumbling over and ending up on his back. And then it really seemed impossible to get up. Lying on his back, looking up at the sky, all he seemed to be able to do, however much he tried, was wobble from side to side. He felt like a weeble. His arms and legs were gyrating, uselessly, in the air. He must look, he thought, like a beetle or a cockroach when they get stuck on their backs. It was at this point Malcolm noticed something about his arms, which were the only limbs he could actually see. He noticed that they were kind of green and kind of elephantine, not in the sense of large, more in the sense of small, but really like an elephant's, which was odd, seeing as the main thing about elephants is that they are big. So, he thought, mainly to think about something so as not to just start screaming in terror. What isn't an elephant but has legs and arms a bit like an elephant's, only much smaller? Plus, when they roll over, they can't turn back up again. Plus is green? He felt like the answer was right there, just beyond his reach. "Hello," said a deep, low voice next to his ear. "You in a bit of a pickle, mate?" Malcolm looked around to see where the voice was coming from. Despite everything else he might have thought at that moment, when he saw where it was indeed coming from, what he actually thought was, of course, that's what's smaller than an elephant, but with similar shaped arms and legs and gets stuck on its back and is green. A tortoise. And then finally, he screamed in terror. Chapter 10. Option C. About a minute later, Malcolm stopped screaming. Maybe I imagined it all, he thought. He closed his eyes tight and opened them again, and then he looked at his wrinkly green arms and thought about how he'd rolled on his back and got stuck there. He craned forward and saw a section of something that was clearly on his back. It looked a bit like a World War II German soldier's helmet, only greener and more, well, shell-like, tortoise shell-like. And then he started screaming again. The tortoise, the one who wasn't Malcolm, just watched him curiously the whole time, and then he said, "Well, it's not that bad." "Yes, it is," said Malcolm. I'm a tortoise. I'm a tortoise." "I know that, but it's happened to all of us at some point." "Has it?" Malcolm, through his fear, felt a glimmer of hope. "It happens to lots of people. This tortoise was also a human who had somehow ended up a tortoise. Of course, that's why he could speak. Then there must be a way back to being you." "Hey," he said, as the tortoise broke Malcolm's train of thought by nuzzling his snout somewhere under Malcolm's shell. "Hang on," said the tortoise. "Hang on to what?" said Malcolm, as he felt himself being lifted onto his side, and then perched on his side. He rotated, slightly like a very slowly spinning coin. The tortoise backed away and retreated inside his shell. "What are you doing?" said Malcolm. "Don't leave me on the edge of my..." "Edge? Just taking a breather," said the tortoise, emerging from his shell. "You're not exactly terrapin-sized, are you? And besides, I need you to keep spinning around until I'm facing your shell side. Can't you walk around to my..." Malcolm couldn't believe he was saying it. "My shell side?" The tortoise blinked. "Do you want to stay like that until next year?" No, thought not." Malcolm continued to revolve. Helplessly he watched as the tortoise disappeared from view. Right, said the tortoise's voice. Try and stay like that. I'll take a bit of a run-up. About 15 minutes passed. During those 15 minutes, Malcolm thought about what on earth could have happened. These were the options as he saw them. A. He was dreaming. But he didn't think this could be right, as he normally only dreamt about computers, and never about animals. Plus, it really didn't feel like a dream. B. He was having some kind of hallucination, brought on by extreme boredom following a whole day, a whole life it felt like, of people telling him about animals. C. He had turned into a tortoise. He was mainly going with option B, option A being dismissed for the reasons explained within option A, and option C being, not possible. Either way, he thought, it was best to just go along with what was happening, and assume that eventually everything could be back to normal. The only alternative, after all, was screaming in horror, and there was a limit to how long he could do that for. Then Malcolm felt a bump on the other tortoise finally reached him. Gradually, more or less, at the speed that the Bailey family car boot door shut when not slammed. He came back down, the right way up. Oof, he said. He looked to his left. The tortoise was still there. Thanks, said Malcolm, because that was what the tortoise looked like he was expecting. No worries. The tortoise, satisfied, began to turn around. Sorry, Benny. Benny, you're one of the farm tortoises with Bjorn? Yes, of course. I'm not a wild tortoise. Malcolm frowned, although that wasn't something that was easily noticeable. Basically, his face just went a little more wrinkly than usual. Are there such things? Not in the UK, no. Said Malcolm. You said earlier that it happens to all of us. Well, it does. How do you get out of it, then? Benny looked at him. Like I just showed you. What did you show me? How to get out of being stuck on your back. Malcolm shook his head. Even that, he was aware, took quite a bit of time. No, I thought you meant get out of being a tortoise. How'd you get out of being a tortoise? Oh, said Benny. Can't help you there, I'm afraid. Which was when Malcolm started screaming again. Chapter 11. Benny and Bjorn. But I don't want to be a tortoise, said Malcolm, when he finally stopped screaming. Excuse me, said another voice, sounding very cross. Malcolm and Benny looked around. It was another tortoise. That's a terrible thing to say, the other tortoise said, in a higher voice than Benny's. Why would you not want to be a tortoise? It's a wonderful thing to be. No, it isn't, said Benny. Shut up, said the tortoise, the new tortoise. It's a bit depressing sometimes, you know, when a frightening thing happens, like a fox appears or a loud noise, and you stick your head inside your shell. Sometimes you can be in there for hours, not sure whether or not to come out. Only if you're a scaredy tortoise like you. Although, I like the long sleeping part, said Benny. That's nice. Bjorn, I presume, said Malcolm, to the new tortoise. Yes, however, I prefer Bjornita. Oh, you're like a girl tortoise born in a boy tortoise body. No, I'm just a girl tortoise, and Gavin knew that as well when they named me. So, why did they call you Bjorn? Bjornita raised her eyes, almost as if she had eyebrows. They thought calling the two of us after the two human men in ABBA was hilarious. I mean, personally, said Benny, I think if you're going to do that kind of joke, there are other options. Sonny and Cher, said Bjornita. It's obvious. You could have been Sonny, I could have been Cher. Sorry, who? Sonny and... Oh, you mean you've never heard of... Oh, well, they were a singing duo in the 1960s. Married, well, for a bit. She was a hippie and he was... How do you know all this stuff, said Malcolm, interrupting what looked like it was going to be a fairly long description of the career of Sonny and Cher. Bjornita and Benny looked at each other. Well, said Benny, we are 150 years old. Speak for yourself, said Bjornita. I'm not a day over 148. No, I mean, said Malcolm. How? Wait, really? You're really 148 years old? Are you saying I'm lying? Said Bjornita, looking hurt. No, said Malcolm. Well, to be fair, Bjornita, you are, said Benny. So I'm 149, she said. So sue me. No, what I meant was, how do you know about human stuff? Oh, said Benny, humans. They think animals can't understand what they're talking about. Well, said Bjornita, except for when they say things like, come here, Benny, come here, Bjorn, lettuce, look, lovely lettuce. They think we understand that. Frankly, though, I find it patronising, talking to us like we're children. I guess it must be, said Malcolm, especially when you're actually 149 years old. 148? You already admitted your age, whispered Benny. Oh, yes, said Bjornita. Anyway, said Malcolm, so you're telling me you've never been humans, and so you don't know any way for me to get back to being a human? Benny and Bjornita looked at each other. Sorry, walk that very slowly past me again, said Benny, turning back to Malcolm. Malcolm frowned. Don't you mean run that past me again? Benny looked at him. I'm a tortoise. Oh, I see, said Malcolm. Well, that's what I've been trying to tell you. I'm not a tortoise. Benny and Bjornita stared at him, at his green skin and bald head and little elephanty limbs and large, hard shell. Are you sure about that? Said Bjornita. Yes, I'm a boy, a human boy. My name is Malcolm. Really? Benny and Bjornita seemed to suppress laughter. They shook a little inside their shells. Are you laughing? No. You're shaking inside your shells. That's a tortoise thing, said Benny. You'll get used to it, said Bjornita. Malcolm. No, you are laughing. It's a bit hard to tell because your tortoise faces don't really smile, but you are. All right, we are, said Bjornita. Benny, embarrassed, had put his head inside his shell. So stop. Okay. And Benny, come out again. He did. So listen, please, the fact is I'm not a tortoise. Or at least I'm not usually a tortoise. I was just talking to that goat. Talking to a goat. So, were you a goat, as well as a human? Said Bjornita, a bit sarcastically. No, I was talking to the goat when I was a human, in human language. I wasn't thinking that the goat understood. I was just telling the goat, in fact, that I... Which goat was that? Said Benny suddenly. Which goat? What was he called again? Malcolm tried to remember. Suddenly that felt difficult, as if everything that had happened, up to the point of him becoming a tortoise, was disappearing from his memory. For a second, he started to wonder if what he was saying was wrong, if he had ever been human at all. And that felt even more frightening than anything else that had happened so far. Chapter 12. A sudden chill. But then it came back to him. Capax, the old one. Benny nodded. Bjornita nodded. What? Said Malcolm. Well, whispered Benny, there's a rumour here on the farm that Capax can do stuff. Like what? Weird stuff, said Bjornita, also in a whisper. Magic stuff. Yes, because sometimes, right, said Benny, leaning forward and speaking even more quietly and looking round as if they were being watched. He baaas like a sheep. And, said Bjornita, leaning into what was now a very close triangle of tortoise heads, I've heard that some of the lady goats in there, because of him, can make milk like a cow. Malcolm nodded. He took a deep breath. Yes, sorry, none of that is magic. It isn't, said Benny. No, it's just what goats do. How do you know? Said Bjornita. We're just going by what we've heard, because we can't see over the fence. No, but I can. I was looking over the fence earlier today when I was a boy. Benny and Bjornita looked to each other. Maybe he's telling the truth, Benny. Yes, maybe he is Bjorn. Eater? Oh, yes, sorry, sometimes even I forgot. Well, as I said Bjornita, being a tortoise is not such a terrible thing to be, but if it's true that you are a boy, I can see how it might seem. Terrible, said Benny, absolutely awful. Shut up, she said, and then she looked at Malcolm, who was hanging his little tortoise head. Bjornita, though quite high and mighty, was not without compassion. Listen, Malcolm, she said, I'm sure we can find a way out of this. The first question to ask is, why have you been changed into a tortoise? What were you saying to Capax? Malcolm cast his mind back. Again, it took a bit more of an effort to remember than he'd thought it would, given it wasn't that long ago. But then the words reappeared in his mind. I was saying to him that I didn't really like, that I didn't know why I didn't like, and if there was any way of getting to like. Malcolm trailed off. Benny and Bjornita looked at him quizzically. Look, Malcolm said, never mind exactly what I said to Capax. I just need to know if there's anything I can do, anything I need to do to break the spell. What happened next? After you spoke to him, said Benny. I don't know. I fell asleep. Well, maybe that's it. What is? You changed into a tortoise when you fell asleep. So maybe you'll change back to a human if you fall asleep again. Malcolm thought about this. He had no clue if it was right. Apart from anything, it was, after all, an idea being suggested to him by a tortoise. And you know, even someone who really likes animals to begin with, even his mum or dad or sister, might not necessarily think that the answer to really difficult and mysterious questions lay with Benny the tortoise. But he didn't have any other ideas, so he shrugged his shoulders and closed his eyes. And then he heard a loud slam, and the ground began to shake. Chapter 13. Manky Lettuce. Immediately, Benny and Bjornita's heads went inside their shells. What's happening? Said Malcolm, opening his eyes wide. Nothing. No response. It was like talking to two khaki domes or two rather mossy rocks. The ground shook more and more loudly. Benny, Bjornita, said Malcolm, panicked. What should I do? Still nothing. The ground was now shaking a lot, and Malcolm could hear a noise. Tramp, tramp, tramp. Oh my God, he thought, and then suddenly he knew what to do. He darted his head inside his shell. Inside it was dark and quiet. He could still hear the tramp, tramp, tramp from outside, but it was much more like tramp, tramp, tramp. It was a bit like being inside a tent, kind of cosy but rather cramped, and obviously stiffer than a tent. His shell did not flap in the wind. It was echoey as well. He could hear his breath sounding loud in his ears. What was strange, well, it was all strange, but this was particularly strange, was that although he knew his head was inside the shell, the hole to the outside looked like it was where his head should be, like his head had been cut off, even though he knew it couldn't have been, and he was looking at the hole with his eyes, which were in his head. Luckily, he wasn't able to carry on thinking about this, because then, somewhat muffled, he heard a voice say, "Come here, Benny! Come here, Bjorn!" This was followed by the sound of something being scattered on the ground. Through the hole in his shell, Malcolm saw 3 bits of manky lettuce and an ancient cucumber lying there. From his point of view, these vegetables looked very large. The manky lettuce leaves looked like bushes. Also, they smelt. Those vegetables, well, strong, much stronger than he would have expected. And he found himself drawn via this strong smell of old vegetables, which was not something, to be honest, that Malcolm was normally attracted by, towards the rotting leaves. And then slowly, very slowly, like it was in super slow-mo, he saw Benny's head appear and start munching in that, carefully considering every morsel of manky lettuce way tortoises eat. And then Bjornita's head doing the same thing. And then he heard another voice say, "Hey, Gav." "Yes, Mav." "Who's that?" "Who's that who?" "That tortoise." "It's Benny, isn't it?" "No, Benny's here." "Well, then it's Bjorn." "No, Bjorn's here too." There was a long silence. Eventually Malcolm heard Gavin say, "So, there's a third tortoise?" "Like, yeah, and yeah again." Another silence then. "So that means that, yeah, Benny and Bjorn have had a baby. Hey, great news." At this point, Malcolm stuck his head out of the shell. "No, look," he said. "Gavin, Maven, I'm not a baby tortoise. I'm obviously not a baby tortoise. I'm too big for a start. Tortoises don't come out of the egg full-sized." Gavin and Maven looked at him. Gavin frowned. Maven frowned. "Anyway, never mind that," Malcolm continued. "Listen, I know this is hard to believe, but I'm Malcolm Bailey from the Bracket Wood Primary School trip, the boy who was standing at the back when you were telling us about the goat, and I've been transformed into a tortoise." Gavin and Maven crouched down and stared at Malcolm closely. He looked up at them. Thank God, he thought, they believe me, they understand. And then Gavin said, "Wow, this one makes a lot of squeaky noises." Chapter 14. That's porpoises. "Yeah," said Maven, "like babies do, I guess. And hey, he's got blue eyes, cute." "Yeah, kind of unusual for a tortoise. Anyway," said Gavin, getting up, "let's go and tell the kids from Bracket Wood. Bring them out to see our new baby tortoise. We can call it Benyorn, or Bjorny, or even Agnefa." "Fabulous idea. By the way, Gav, it's quite big for a baby, isn't it?" "Oh, they probably come out of their egg full size, don't they?" "Like, yeah." Malcolm heard their voices diminish. Through the hole in his shell, he could see their feet rushing away, tramping down the grass as they went. "We can understand them," came a quieter voice from behind him, "but they can't understand us." "Manky lettuce?" Malcolm turned around. Benny was looking at him, his food laid out on the ground. "No thanks," he said. "Please yourself," said Benny, and tucked in. Bjornita was so busy eating, she didn't even look up, and then Malcolm heard a host of excited children's voices. "Where is it? Where's the new baby tortoise? Is he over there?" Malcolm looked up. Rushing out of the farmhouse were all the Bracket Wood children and Mr. Barrington. "Oh dear," thought Malcolm, "I really don't want to be surrounded by my year, all going on about what a lovely full-sized baby tortoise I am. I don't want to be picked up and stared at by Morris Fawcett, or Fred and Ellie, or Barry Bennett and his friends Jake, Lucas and Taj, or Mr. Barrington." Malcolm shut his eyes. Sleep, he thought. It might work. Benny might be right. In fact, he probably is. That is when I changed, when I fell asleep. Okay, yes, that's definitely what's going to change me back to being a human. So come on, sleep. Of course, falling asleep isn't easy when you're trying to do it. It's fine when it's just something that happens. It's like falling off a log. But when you're thinking about it, when you're lying there with your mind going, "Come on, go to sleep. I'm going to be really tired tomorrow otherwise," it feels almost impossible. So even though Malcolm, as we know, was really good at falling asleep, Doing so at this particular moment, with 30 children, 1 teacher and 2 hipsters heading quickly towards him, felt very difficult. He heard them coming closer and closer. I love tortoises. They're like dolphins. That's porpoises, Morris, you idiot. Baby tortoise, baby tortoise. Benyorn, Bjorny. Malcolm squeezed his eyes shut tighter and then darted back into his shell. Straight away it felt warm and safe again, and even though he could hear the voices of the children and Mr. Barrington and Gavin and Maven coming closer and closer, the safety of the shell had a massively calming effect on him, and he remembered just how good he was at feeling asleep. And did. Chapter 15. Hello, M. Mr. Barrington was finding it very hard to see his so-called baby tortoise. Tortoises, he knew, had green-brown shells, and so would be difficult to pick out against this grass anyway, especially in the fading light. He was concerned that one of the children, all of whom had got overexcited and were running about madly, might step on it. He couldn't see very well, but he kept his ears cocked for a sickening crunch. He didn't hear that noise, thankfully. What he did hear was the sound of his phone ringing. La 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 la. He reached inside his tweed jacket and took it out. Hello, Mr. Barrington speaking. Hello there, Mr. Barrington. It's Malcolm Bailey's mum here, Jackie. Malcolm, yes, hello. I was just wondering if I could speak to him, see how he's getting on. Mr. Barrington looked around. All of Year 6 appeared to be whirling around him. There were many children, in a big, loud blur. Oh, heavens, he thought, not for the first time. Being a primary school teacher is not an easy job for a man of my age. Right, yes, of course, He reached out and grabbed one of the boys. The boy looked up. Yes, this one is Malcolm, wasn't it? It's your mother on the line, said Mr. Barrington. In the Baileys' living room, Jackie said, Hello, Em. Oh, hello, Mum, came the reply. How's it all going, she said. Yeah, it's all right. Do you, like seeing the animals? Yeah. Although that didn't sound very convincing, Jackie's heart lifted. Maybe the school trip was having the desired effect. Oh, good. Have you learned anything? There was quite a long pause. So long, in fact, that Jackie thought the connection may have dropped out and started looking at her phone. But when the voice came, saying the sentence quite slowly, cows don't produce burgers. Jackie took this in. Right, she said. Well, that's good, I'm sure. Yeah. There was another pause. Sorry, Em, I can't hear you very well. Your voice sounds a bit strange and there's a lot of shouting in the background. That's because everyone's looking for a porpoise. No, wait a minute. Tortoise, innit? Oh, well, said Jackie. It sounds fun, although you sound a little like you've got a cold or something. Are you keeping warm? Don't fuss, Mum. Gotta go. See you soon. She heard a click and the line went dead. How was that? Said Stuart, who was reading the newspaper on the other side of the room. Jackie thought for a moment and then shrugged and said, Better than I expected. Chapter 16. Slurp, slurp, slurp. When Malcolm woke up, a little while later, he was sure he'd gone back to being a human, because his vision was no longer full of grass and feet. His eyes were clearly operating at the right level. He had a great view, in fact, of his year group, coming back towards the farmhouse, looking a bit disappointed. I don't know where it disappeared to, Gavin was saying. When we went out to feed Ben and Bjorn, there was definitely another tortoise there. Oh, there it is, said Mr. Barrington. No, Mr. Barrington, that's just a big mound of manky lettuce, said Barry Bennett. Oh. Very relieved, Malcolm assumed they'd spot him in a minute and ask him where he'd been. Wait till I tell them, he thought, although they probably wouldn't believe me. But strangely, all the children from his year, and Gavin and Maven and Mr. Barrington, just ignored him. They got closer and closer without seeming to notice him at all. And then, weirdly, they seemed to pass underneath him. At which point Malcolm realised his eyes weren't actually operating at the right level. He was higher up than anybody else. He was, in fact, on the farmhouse roof. Before he had a chance to consider how he might have got there, he heard someone scream, Get off my roof! This was followed by a searing pain across his back. Malcolm jumped, really jumped, much higher than he was expecting. As he reached the top of his jump, he looked down. Looking up at him, teeth bared, fur standing up, was the farm cat, Zaza. This was all very confusing. Why was he on the roof? How had he jumped so high? Was the farm cat so angry at him? Why? Well, there was one obvious answer which did occur to Malcolm, although he preferred not to think about it, but that was quite difficult, seeing as the other thing that was cluing him in it as to what had happened was that his hands and feet, which he could see whirling around beneath him, were black, furry and clawed. At least it meant that he landed gracefully. I said, Get off my roof. This is my roof, my farm, no other cats allowed. Calm down, said Malcolm. I'm not a cat. What? I'm not a cat. Zaza looked at him. She looked and looked. Her eyes seemed to bore into him. And then, very suddenly, she looked away and started washing herself. Malcolm watched her, confused. So, you believe me, said Malcolm. We're good. Of course I don't believe you. I just noticed a speck of dirt on my shoulder. Right, so even though you're really angry, you thought you'd just stop the fight for a second to have a wash. Zaza stopped licking herself and looked at him. Yes, that's what we cats do. Don't pretend you don't. I don't, because I'm not a... Unfortunately, just at that point, Malcolm spotted a tiny bit of matted fur on the side of his left front paw and found himself physically unable not to bring his mouth towards it. It was like his tongue and teeth were made of iron, and the bit of matted fur was a magnet. Cat. Oh, right, said Zaza. I see perfectly. Malcolm drew back his now slightly moist paw and wiped it 2 or 3 times down the side of his face. Not. Zaza clearly didn't believe Malcolm. I say clearly because she jumped on him, biting and scratching. Do you think I'm stupid, do you? She screamed at him. She was dragging his body round as she said this, in order to batter her back legs on his face. No, ow! Although you are purring while you're fighting, which seems a bit stupid. Cats do that sometimes. Oh, right. Ow! Don't pretend you didn't know. Okay, I did know. Aha! Batter, 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 went her back legs on his face. Ow, ow, ow! But I only know because I've heard our cats do it at home, when I was a human. This is the worst lying excuse for encroaching into another cat's territory I've ever heard. You can ask the tortoises, Benny and Bionita. This did actually make Zaza stop battering him for a second. She rolled away, disdainfully. She stared at him, slightly more quizzically than before, although still like she might jump on him at any moment. Or start washing, which in fact she did. So, yes, said Malcolm. You can ask the Shh, she said, her voice muffled by fur. I'm thinking. Slurp, slurp. Malcolm breathed heavily. He looked down at his feet, which were not feet, really. They were paws. He noticed his claws were sharp. It occurred to him that he might, in fact, have been able to fight Zaza off. OK, said Zaza, stopping washing as suddenly as she started. Something weird is going on here, because only animals from this farm know about the transgender tortoise. She's not transgender. She's just a she, who Gavin called Bjorn. She prefers Bjornita. Whatever. How do you know that? Malcolm sighed. What he was about to say seemed even less believable than that he was actually a human. Because I was a tortoise. Just now, before I was a cat. I was speaking to the goat and... OK, this is ridiculous, said Zaza. I know, said Malcolm. But ask the tortoises. I can't, said Zaza. Why not? They're just over there, said Malcolm. In the middle distance, he could see Benny and Bjornita, like little tanks, circling the last pieces of manky lettuce. I don't speak tortoise. Oh, this hadn't occurred to Malcolm. He'd assumed all animals could speak all other animals' languages. He, it seemed, could speak tortoise and cat, although maybe he could only speak tortoise when he was a tortoise and cat when he was a cat. There was a lot to learn about being an animal. So, said Malcolm, how do you know about Bjorn wanting to be called Bjornita if you don't speak tortoise? I speak a bit of dog. Right. Malcolm looked at Zaza for a while. She looked back at him blankly. No, I don't understand how that helps, Malcolm said eventually. Zaza seemed to shake her head and tut, although she may have just been getting rid of a flea. The dog knows about the tortoises. He told me. Trotsky. Oh, another short pause. So Trotsky speaks tortoise? No, said Zaza. He speaks frog, which is pretty similar to tortoise, apparently. Right. When he speaks it, the dog. When the dog speaks frog, said Malcolm, thinking, how am I saying these things? How can this actually be happening? Yes, it's kind of a croak. I can't make it out at all. He just seems to be saying sausages over and over again. Anyway, I'll ask him. Ask him what? But before she could answer that, Zaza, in 3 graceful leaps, had bounded down from the roof and was on the ground. Chapter 17. Katamani Story. Malcolm watched from above, not sure whether to follow Zaza, and turned round and faced the doorway of the farm. Trotsky! Trotsky! Come here immediately, she cried. Within seconds, the farm sheepdog had appeared. Woof, 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 woof. OK, thought Malcolm. Clearly, I don't understand dog. Yes, whatever, oi, said Zaza, looking up at him. What's your name? Malcolm. Malcolm, what kind of a name for a cat is that? It's not a name for a cat. It's a name for a human. Cats aren't called things like that. You say that. But once I heard the humans talking about a cat called, get this, Dr. Zeus. That's a cat who's a doctor, not even a vet. Malcolm sighed. That's the name of the author, not the cat, he said. What's an author? Said Zaza. It's... Never mind. Anyway, the cat in the hat isn't a real cat, he said. Zaza frowned. Course it is. I saw a picture. Furry, whiskers, tail, the lot. The big long hat didn't trouble you at all? Nope. I assumed he was cold. Anyway, Malk... Don't call me Malk. I'll call you what I like. Malk, come down here. Malcolm looked down. Directly down. The ground suddenly seemed a long way off. He looked back to Zaza. Trotsky the dog was with her, looking up at him, his tongue hanging expectantly out of his mouth. How do I do that? Shh! You're a cat. No, I've told you, I'm a... Look, even if your Catamani story about being a boy really is true, and I have to admit, I haven't been a cat with eyes that blue. Well, I haven't seen a cat with eyes that blue before. You're definitely rocking a cat's body right now, so I'm pretty sure that a hop onto the guttering, a shimmy down to the window, and a leap from there is going to be no problem. Malcolm looked down again. It really looked high. Once, back when he had been a human boy, which was starting to feel like quite a long time ago, he had gone swimming with the school, and various boys had dared each other to dive from the top diving board at his local swimming pool. Barry, Lucas, Taj and Morris had all done it, although Morris had more fallen off than dived. But Malcolm couldn't. It looked not that high from the side of the pool, but once he'd walked up that ladder, right to the end of the board and looked down at the water, it felt like he was on top of a mountain. So, after trembling there for a bit, he just came down again, feeling sure that everyone in his year was looking at him and laughing. This wasn't as high as that, although proportionately it was. Malcolm thought, seeing as back then he had been 4.5 feet high, whereas now his head was about 8 inches off the ground, or rather the roof. So in terms of his present size, the drop was actually much, much higher. So he just crouched there for a while, not knowing what to do and feeling scared. And then he heard Zaza shout. Come on, Malk! Pardon, said Malcolm. I said, come on, Malk. We haven't got all day. 2 things got under Malcolm's fur about this. 1, he didn't like being called Malk. 2, animals had nothing to do. So the one thing they did have, as far as Malcolm could make out, was all day. Don't call me Malk. Why not? It's short for Malcolm. All cats get their names shortened. Gav and Mav call me Zizi. That isn't shorter. Eh? Zizi takes as long to say as Zaza. Zaza yawned. This may or may not have been because she was bored. It was a cat yawn. Just come down, Malk. Right, that's it, thought Malcolm. And in his anger, he just leapt into the air for a moment. His paws whirled madly, as if he had no idea how to direct his flight. But then suddenly, as if propelled by some internal steering wheel, his sleek cat body twirled towards the gutter, his back legs bouncing elegantly off it, directing him down towards the window ledge, where he landed for a split second before bounding up again, and, by now thoroughly enjoying himself, spinning around in mid-air twice before settling, finally on the grass exactly in between Trotsky and Zaza. Zaza looked at him wearily. Yeah, very cat-like, or very un-cat-like, I must say. That was fun, said Malcolm. It was brilliant. Modest, too, said Zaza. Oh, wait a minute, she added pointedly, her ears cocked. What's that noise? What noise? That noise, said Zaza. Malcolm listened. He could hear a nice comforting sound, a continuous breathy vibration, which sounded something like from fur. Where's that coming from? He said. You. It's called purring, Mr. I'm not a cat. Anyway, Trotsky? Woof. Can you ask the tortoises if this cat, Malcolm, was, just a minute ago, a tortoise? Woof, woof, woof. Yes, I know it's weird. Just ask them. Woof, woof. You won't look stupid, or at least no more stupid than you do when you sniff of another dog's bum. Woof. I do not. Well, only if it's a cat I really know well. Looking like he wasn't at all sure about that assertion, Trotsky turned around. So did Malcolm and Zaza. Benny and Bjornita were approaching them slowly. Trotsky went off towards them. Malcolm asked Zaza, How come Trotsky's just doing what you ask him? I thought dogs didn't like cats. Zaza stared at him. Now I'm starting to think you might be telling the truth about being a boy. Why? Because all real cats know that whole cat versus dogs thing is just an act. It's something we do for the humans, for their cartoons and stuff. In real life, we get on really well, just as long as dogs know their place, of course. Ruff, 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 said Trotsky. Zaza and Malcolm turned around. Benny and Bjornita had finally got close enough. Okay, Trotsky, ask them. Ask them if Malk here was just one of them. Ruff. Trotsky crouched down. He sniffed at Benny, and then Bjornita. Malcolm watched, not entirely convinced the dog was going to talk to the tortoises. It looked more like he was about to eat them. Then he went in a low growl. Sausages, 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 sausages. His head whirled around, nodding towards Malcolm. Sausages, sausages, sausages. His head whirled back to the tortoises. Sausages, sausages, sausages. Yes, said Benny. If that's Malcolm, he was just with us. And definitely then he looked like a tortoise, said Bjornita. Oh, said Malcolm. I can understand you two. Maybe then I can understand the languages of animals I've been. Sorry, said Zaza. Now it sounds like you're just saying sausages. I can talk to the tortoises. Hi, Benny. Hi, Bjornita. Hello, Malk, said Benny. Don't call me Malk. I understand that, said Bjornita. Malcolm, how's life as a cat now? It's great. I see. Better than being a tortoise? Bjornita turned away haughtily. Well, I think your silence speaks volumes, doesn't it, Benny? What do you mean, Bjornita? I mean, clearly he thinks it's better being a cat than a tortoise. Well, said Benny, it probably is. Don't say that. Sorry, but sometimes I think I'd quite like fur and speed and people stroking me and lots of photos of me looking cute on the internet. Hello, said Zaza. I have no idea what you chaps are saying to each other, but I am still here. I am still waiting for an answer to the question, was this cat very recently a tortoise? Ruff, 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 said Trotsky. Oh, use your cat words, Trotsky, said Zaza. Ruff, 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 he said gently. Don't be silly, your accent isn't stupid. Trotsky raised his eyes, looking a bit ashamed, and then he said, Yes, the tortoise lady one and not lady one, they say that they are thinking that this kitty is yes Malcolm the boy human, who was only just now a tortoise, yes. Zaza looked at Malcolm. Blimey, she said. You see, said Malcolm, feeling vindicated at last. I'd forgotten quite how stupid his accent is, in fact, in real life. And that is where we will leave part 2 of Animalcolm by David Baddiel. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always much appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.